and welcome to the Southwesterners Forum. We're joined today by Cliff Lea, Senior Pastor of First Baptist Church Leesburg in Leesburg, Florida, and Dr. Lily Park, Associate Professor of Biblical Counseling here at Southwestern. Today, Pastor Lea is going to share about how he applied some newfound classroom knowledge to his marriage, and it did not go as planned.
She'd had enough, and she looked at me and says, "I don't care about your stupid books."
Hello, I'm Dr. Park, and I teach in biblical counseling at Southwestern Seminary, and I'm here with Pastor Lea.
Hello, Pastor Cliff Lea. I'm the senior pastor of First Baptist Leesburg, and I'm a graduate of Southwestern Seminary in 1996. So it's good to be with you today. I was asked to give a little more elaboration on an article that I was asked to write for Southwestern Seminary, and I'll kind of go into that. So I was asked to share an experience about class that I remember today that I'm applying to my life today. And so I entered into Southwestern Seminary in 1992. I kind of grew up at the seminary, though, however. My father was a professor there, the late Dr. Tommy Lee, and we moved there, and I was an 8-year-old kid in 1978. So I grew up at the rack, playing racquetball and basketball, and so I love the school, I love it to this day. It means so much to me. But so in 1992, I was a newlywed. I finished Hardin-Simmons University, and I enrolled. It was a very expected move for me, feeling called to ministry. There was no other choice for seminary other than Swivitz for me. And so my new wife, Susie, we moved to, well, it's sad, Carroll Park is no longer. So the place where we, learned our first year of marriage is no longer there. So, but anyway, we lived on 4040 Sandage Avenue for what that matters to any listeners. But one of the great things about Susie, she had a real mutual call to ministry. She felt very led to be a pastor's wife, but she was just so interested in what I was learning. And so when we would go walking a lot, she was a first year or second year teacher, and we would go on walks after, she got home and I got home. We would just talk all during dinner. We didn't have a TV, our first year of marriage, and we were just talking all the time, walking and talking all the time. She was interested in the classes I had. She loves the Bible and all that stuff. And one class I had, I think it was second semester now, was with Dr. Ray Clendenning. And it was a class on relationship counseling, the healthy relationships. I can't remember the exact name of it, but I do remember there was a powerful book by Dr. David Augsburger called Caring Enough to Confront. And I devoured that book. It was such light reading compared to the big theology books and the other textbooks. It was also, I'd never really studied that kind of subject before. And so it was super practical. It talked a lot about the importance of relational conflict resolving. And if you care about somebody, you're going to bring up the hard stuff. So this was kind of perfect-ish for newlyweds, because Susie and I were incurably in love with each other and are to this day by the grace of God. We were just the ultimate kind of floating around the campus newlyweds that were just head over heels for one another. But we also were immature, we're 22 years old, we're trying to figure out marriage and that kind of thing. So it was a mixture of, the emotion of love and the kind of the knucklehead, ness of being a young person and not totally knowing how to express our feelings. We both were raised in homes where there wasn't a ton of conflict. And so it was just not, when we experienced disagreements, even though they didn't get necessarily heated, it felt so unlike the euphoria we normally experience. And so we kind of didn't know what to do with it. So here I am reading this book. And it says that you don't just kind of sweep stuff under the emotional rug of your house. And I started noticing that if I wasn't careful, I hated conflict so much, I was going to put up with a lumpy emotional rug, and just kind of, no big deal. We'll just forget about that. And so I started reading this book, and it kind of convinced me that if I care about our relationship, I'd be willing to talk stuff through. So I began to just take it seriously. And the book had some guidelines. It kind of gives the formula. I'm sure, Dr. Park, you've given certain formulas for couples to use and utilize in their counseling and their relationship. And one of them was this: when you, and then list the offense. Don't put an insult, but list the specific offense. I feel, and you're supposed to give like a one-word emotion, not like a big, once again, not I feel like you're an idiot, but I feel frustrated, And then because you're supposed to list a way forward, like, hey, when you are talking on the phone to your mom for an hour when I get home, I feel frustrated because I love you so much and I want to talk about our day together. That was an example of how you're supposed to do it. So anyway, dear Susie, I'm telling her about the books and she's like, okay. Now what happened was I became like a bit of a caring enough to confront Nazi because I began to just kind of like, oops, babe, you just kind of broke the rules of the book I've been telling you about. And she's like, oh, sorry, what am I supposed to do? And I think one day, to this day, we chuckle about it, and I can't remember, what offense she was committing, what awful relationship crime. I'm sure it was quite minor, but she said something. We were disagreeing about something, and I said, Suze, that's not how we're supposed to talk according to the book. I don't think I was necessarily stern, but I was definitive. And she looked at me, and she is the sweetest thing on 2 feet. I wish everybody could meet her. I've never met a more wonderful person. I'm quite biased, I know. But she had enough. She'd had enough of this first-year seminary student that was all high and mighty on my knowledge of relationships. And she looked at me and says, I don't care about your stupid books. That was literally what she said. I haven't read your stupid books. I don't care about them. And so I'm kind of like, what do I say? And then it's just it was so unusual for us to talk that way that it just lingered. And I don't know, in my mind, it's kind of like 15 to 20 seconds later, we both look at each other and start laughing. And it's better, as everyone knows, if you're laughing, you want to mutually be laughing. You don't want one to be laughing and the other not, So what I guess the takeaway for me was that I needed to, one, not be so into the principles of the book that I'm policing her, but also that there needs to be a natural way for us to mutually implement them. And so I apologize to her for that. I'm like, dear, you're right, doll. So let's figure out how we want to do this. So the truth is, I try to basically just focus on clarity and communication myself. And if she was going to break the rules, I wasn't going to say anything. In time, she began to, for lack of a better word, she began to kind of see the wisdom of the book without me having to remind her that this is the book. And when we got into pastoral ministry, which was really right away in a lot of ways, I was a college pastor for the first 7 years of our marriage. And she's ministering to college students the whole time. And I'm doing a lot of premarital counseling. By the way, premarital counseling is so much better than postmarital counseling. And so I began to practice those principles from that book with kids that I was talking to, and she would do the same. And so if she would ever, and then I became a senior pastor in 1999, and mostly that role ever since. And so at our current church, I don't do as much counseling, but I still like to prioritize premarital counseling. That's kind of my thing. I'll do a little bit of postmarital, but Susie and I have had such a blissful 33-year marriage, and that book still helps me to this day, that I take on probably half a dozen premarital counseling clients for, they're not charged or anything, but clients a year. And recently, just 2 weeks ago, I was doing with a sweet young couple. They're in their mid-20s. They're just precious. They were in our singles group. They fell in love. And I have a little lesson on relational conflict. I don't necessarily tell that story, but I do mention when I feel because that Dr. Osberger mentions in the book. So now, as I kind of land the airplane of my story, I would say that, there's a lot of classes that have helped me at Southwestern Seminary. I had my dad for a couple of classes. Those were great. I had Dr. Vaughn, the late Dr. Curtis Vaughn, New Testament as well. And I remember I quote him still, a couple of things he said. I had the late Calvin Miller I had for church growth, evangelism, and things like that. I love to quote him as well. But I don't think there's a class that I use more regularly throughout the year than what I learned from that was an unsuspecting class that it helped my marriage a great deal because Susie and I learned to communicate better, but it's also helped our ministry because I'm able to, share those principles with young couples. And in many cases, and I got to do premarital counseling with 3 of my 4 married kids, and I go over that lesson and I share that principle too. So you might say it's impacting generations in many ways. So anyway, Dr. Parker, I just wanted to share that with you and our Southwestern family who may be listening about how that's helped me in my own life.
I love it. Thank you. I can tell you've been in ministry a long time. The way you're talking about how post-marriage counseling is more difficult than premarital, it's not the same thing, right? They're totally different. It's more messy, right? But I like your story because it's just a reminder that, ministry is not about a list of, it's not a formula, right? This is, if you follow the steps, you're going to have happy marriage or happy pastoral ministry, whatever it might be. I think your story is a good example. You need to know the principles, the biblical truth, but how you practice it, it's not all neat, and it can be more messy than that. So I have a question with this book. Would you say this has been really helpful for you? I know you talked about using these principles with premarital counseling, but has that been really helpful? For example, as a pastor, do you think it's made a significant difference in your ministry as a pastor?
Yeah, it has. I mean, a few years ago, I taught a sermon series on the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs is hard to teach. So you don't teach through it verse by verse like you would, an epistle or a gospel. Or you can, I suppose, but it's better. It's so thematic, right? That it's better to say, what does Proverbs teach on money, on pride, on this, that, and the other. So I taught a lesson on conflict resolution. That's a huge need, in our culture. People don't know how to solve basic conflicts, much less, we're talking, countries need to learn to solve massive conflicts. But so for that lesson, I picked out several verses like Proverbs 27, 5 and 6, and Proverbs 28, 23, Proverbs 10, 18. And a lot of those verses I got from the teachings of that book. And I literally pulled that Caring Enough to Confront book off my shelf and thumbed through it as I believe that I was probably out of seminary like 25 years or so at that point. And or maybe a little less than that. But I'm like, I don't want to say this. I guess I'm going to say this on record that as I've moved positions or moved offices through the years, I didn't take all of my seminary textbooks with me. You start running out of space, and some of them are so big, and some of them I think especially with the internet now, the internet wasn't really a thing when I was in seminary. If I ever need to know something about Ashurbanipal for my biblical backgrounds class, I can pretty much find that on Google, but that was definitely a book that I kept with me. So it was a cool feeling. And I've pulled it off the shelf a few times for a few different lessons, but I remember that particularly, it helped me be more practical in a particular sermon series way after the fact.
And I love that because we're talking about that constantly. I mean, you grew up on this campus, right? Your dad taught here.
Yeah.
So you probably heard this a lot. We're not just about teaching you how to study the Bible in context, but what does it mean for life and ministry? And I think your story will be encouraging to many, because sometimes we think, oh, pastors, they never have marriage problems. They never have arguments. And it's just, I think it hurts maybe some of the younger pastors who are still trying to navigate ministry. So I think your story could be really encouraging to people that you will have conflict, but you need to work it out biblically and get a good book on solving conflict biblically. Well, since you shared a story, I wanted to share how I had those unexpected ministry connections too from the academia, right? The things, I guess for me, I was a student a long time, unexpectedly. I wasn't planning to do all this schooling. And then now being on the other side of teaching for over 10 years, I guess. Um, and God has a way of um, humbling me to practice what I'm teaching or what I'm studying. And one of the concepts we talk a lot about in our classes is the heart. And this goes with conflict too. I really appreciated the article by David Powlison, and he talks about the heart. And it's pretty foundational, one of the first writings on the heart. And he talks about how in the Bible, the heart is the core of who you are. And it talks about the heart includes your emotions, your thoughts, your desires, and it's the deepest part of who you are. So when we're struggling with different emotions, conflict, it helps to go back to what is it that I'm really wanting to make me happy here? What is it whose opinion really matters? Or what does success mean in ministry or this work or whatever it might be? Those are samples. He gives like 30 questions, I think, to basically evaluate what we're really wanting in that moment. And that's been so helpful, even when I have disagreements with people or conflicts, to go through some of those questions so that I'm not just looking at, man, I just want this outcome, or I just would really like my desires to happen. But it helps me to think about what is it that I want, and it's not aligning with what God wants for me. And so that's been really helpful in understanding the human heart better when I'm going through ministry in life. And specifically, I'll give you an example is years ago, over 10 years ago, I had one of my first experiences of burnout. So yes, we talked about depression. And yes, we talked about be careful of, overextending yourself and all. And I was counseling, I was a student, I was serving, helping professors and all those things, helping out in church. And I didn't realize, but I was experiencing burnout. And I was just really tired, exhausted, and just things that I enjoyed doing, even ministry, was seeming like a burden, like I wasn't enjoying it. And then I came across the descriptions, symptoms of burnout, and it was like, check, check, check. And I had a moment of, how did I miss this? How did I miss not seeing this in my own life, that I was experiencing? Because, I'm a counseling student, right? And I counsel people, and we're talking about these problems, but I wasn't making that connection immediately. But when I did, it was so helpful that I was able to take a step back and reassess my commitments. And another thing it didn't help was I was working through, you don't have to say yes to everything. You don't have to try to, like being a good servant, being a good student, being a good counselor doesn't mean saying yes to all the requests. So I quickly learned that. Not that I didn't know before, but I think it was a lot going on at once. And so God used that to help me realize that I need to be more intentional and humble, that I can't do everything that I'd like to do. And I can't do everything that I could do. But I have, 24 hours just like everyone else. And I need to sleep. I need to take care of my body too and get rest and not feel guilty about. So it was a process, but it was so life-changing that I've been trying to practice till today, many, many years ago, of being realistic of what I can commit to and not feeling guilty or bad about things I can't. And I think with that goes not trying to please, all the people that you want to please. So that was really, really impactful for me is, even though I knew all that in my head and took classes and books, and I was even helping people going through their struggles, but I didn't realize I was going through those struggles. But that's where God unexpectedly used those readings in the heart and burnout. Burnout can be a form of depression if you're not careful. And it really ministered to me so that I didn't leave ministry, but I made changes to my schedule, slowly took on less cases, was try to be more intentional. But I wanted to share that story because just like yours with conflict, I think Christians don't talk about conflict as much because it seems, if you and I are mature Christian, we shouldn't have conflict, right? And that's not true. But I also wanted to share that example about burnout because I think sometimes Christians need to realize that it's okay to slow down for certain seasons of life, especially if you're working and going to school full time, or if you have little kids at home. That's another, responsibility. So for those who are listening, I hope that encourages them to maybe they need to slow down and reassess their priorities and commitments.
You can learn more about Pastor Cliff Lea's ministry in the upcoming fall 2025 issue of the Southwestern News Magazine, also available at equipthecalled.com. Thanks for joining us for the Southwesterners Forum, and we'll see you next time.